Today's episode is only about It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. For Saturdays in December, I'll be reviewing the new season and talking about the show. If that doesn't float your boat, hit the road. Everybody else, you stick around. From the Philly Inquirer, with the premiere of the 15th season on FXX of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, it will become the longest-running live-action comedy series ever, beating out The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet, which ran for 14 seasons. I love this description. The sitcom, ostensibly about a group of friends who own and run a Philadelphia bar, but is actually about a group of truly awful people, has thrust Philadelphia into the cultural spotlight, leaving many wondering if they can visit Patty's Pub, and others wondering if the city is really full of miscreants like the gang. Again, this from the Philly Inquirer. The show, which premiered in 2005, yeah, you go back, the original episodes are only in 4:3. Remember when TVs were square before they became rectangles? Yeah, there's black bars down the side. I've been in the middle of doing an It's Always Sunny rewatch, and it's like, wow, this show's been on forever now. It both feels new, but also feels like it's been around. Created in 2005 by Philadelphia native Rob McElhenney. He's an alum of St. Joseph's Prep and Temple University, and fellow actors Charlie Day and Glenn Howerton, who also star in the sitcom. The show centers on a group of friends trying and failing to run Patty's Pub, blah, blah, blah. When the show began, the characters were flawed, silly, and selfish, constantly trying to get one over on the other and launching schemes that included buying tanks of gasoline to resell at a higher price and charging people to witness a water stain that appeared to be in the shape of the Virgin Mary. But as the show has gone on, the group has devolved into people who can often relish backstabbing and conning their way through life. Somehow, the sitcom remains hilarious and the gang endearing to watch. Don't worry, I'm going to review episodes 1 and 2 in a second. The show was created out of boredom and a tough few years in Hollywood for Rob McElhenney. He was 27. He had grown tired of looking for acting jobs, picking up what work he could. Eventually, he made a pilot with his friends for the price of a couple pizzas and the tape, and he pitched it to a few networks. FX bought the pilot. Since then, they've tried to shoot in Philadelphia as much as possible. Rob said back in 2005, might kind of get an updated quote here, it's been 16, 17 years, guys. You can't fake Philadelphia. You can't fake a feeling, and feelings come across the screen. Episode 1, 2020 A Year in Review. The summary. The gang looks back on 2020 to justify their numerous PPE loans as they contributed to the chaos of the past political year way more than anyone could have imagined. My quick take here, and I sound ridiculous saying this, I feel like this episode was apocryphal. Like, if we're watching this show as some sort of documentary on what has happened in these 4 people's lives, I feel like this one didn't feel real if you saw it. I'll do a breakdown in a second. It feels like, I can't explain it. It's sort of like if you like Star Trek and you watch Star Trek, the animated series, there are some episodes that you could be like, yeah, that happened in real Star Trek. And there are some things like the 50-foot Vulcan that you're like, no, that doesn't work. We have to just pretend that didn't happen. That's how I feel about this episode. I was entertained, but the plots are just a step too far. We'll get into that. I also didn't love that the gang wasn't together. That was a big problem with season 13. This is season 15. 14, they got the gang back together. 13, they had a lot of solo adventures, and I really didn't feel it. This had a sense of that with 3 anthology sketches. I laughed at the sketches, but I also didn't feel it worked as a show, so I'm conflicted here. I'm cribbing off the AV Club, who writes, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia shakes the rust off in season 15 premiere. Looking back, gets It's Always Sunny off to an uncharacteristically wobbly start. The What We Did on Our Pandemic Vacation structure of 2020 A Year in Review hardly feels like the gracefully filthy re-entry into the It's Always Sunny world that fans may have been anticipating. Instead, the gang's anthology of off-year shenanigans feels rushed and a little obvious, each story in the episode's 3-part structure leaning heavily into the events surrounding a single joke, leaving precious little time for nuance. In the first segment, Mack and Dennis are wearing full government-subsidized tactical gear to harass voters outside the local polling place. They immediately get sidetracked into a debate over which Philly athlete is best. Is it Rocky Balboa or Donovan McNabb? Mack picks Rocky. Dennis counters because, as a non-fictional human being, McNabb has the edge. Mack also says that the celebrity 5'9" Stallone could theoretically have taken the Eagles to the playoffs against the weak NFC East of the 1980s. It's a sort of desperate, on-the-fly, tortured logic Mack depends on. That part was pretty funny. Then we went on to Frank's Imports and Exports. On this one, Frank is making hair dye out of Chinese motor oil. The joke is that one day Rudy Giuliani gets his hair dye from Frank, And then when Rudy in real life showed up at the Four Seasons landscaping company and his hair dye ran, that was because of Frank. And it's like, yeah, I did like how they shot it. They definitely did some Scorsese there. They did some Goodfellas pastiche. That was fun. But it was one joke, and I didn't love it. Then the third part, Dee and Charlie have decided to make masks. Dee is making masks like you wear for COVID. Charlie is making masks that you wear over your head. Pretty good joke in there about, is this a mask of Ronald Reagan or of Dennis? That made me laugh. Their company's called Garments and Varmints. The joke, their raccoon pelt outerwear became the signature costume of the QAnon shaman. Yes, they meet the QAnon shaman in a parking lot, and he wears Dee and Charlie's stuff to the January 6th insurrection. And, really? It's a little too much. And I know I'm saying this about It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where all kinds of ridiculous things happen. Little too much. Davy Club says, these are sketch ideas and hardly imaginative ones. Then, as if he's the avatar for the audience, the man who's there to collect on their loans says, there's no way you were all involved in every major event of last year because you're not Forrest Gump. Then we see some scenes that inserts the gang into real-life events. We see Frank at Giuliani's actual Four Seasons landscaping press conference. We see Charlie and Dee confusedly sporting their Kanye for President gear at the Capitol riots. It's all kind of Davy Club gave it a C+. That sounds about right. But on the other hand, I was laughing. Episode 2, The Gang Makes Lethal Weapon 7. Good timing here since Mel Gibson is actually making real-life Lethal Weapon 5. Incited by Frank's ire that the local library has pulled the gang's first 2 deeply unofficial Lethal Weapon sequels from the shelves, Dennis notes that he's pretty shocked the library took the films in the first place. Good joke. The gang decides the only solution is to make yet another film and to do it right this time. The gang grapples with the changing face of Hollywood with regard to everything from blackface to cancellation to whether or not Frank really needs to perform actual on-screen hardcore penetration this time out. Mack says Hollywood has a very clear moral code on mistakes. You get one. Dennis notes that Mack's examples of Woody Allen, Bill Cosby, and Roman Polanski show the exact opposite of that, adding, I would actually argue that these things that we're talking about, they weren't so much mistakes as they were violent sexual crimes. Mack wants credit for not doing blackface this time. He gets to direct Lethal Weapon 7. Dennis gets to preach to the others that their casting choices are drawn from the only black people they've ever really interacted with. All the people of color that we know are the people of the bridges and the streets, their pimps and their prostitutes, and that says a lot more about us than it does about them. The AV Club says, it's funny enough, I especially like when Dennis's lofty pretensions see him incorporating rhetorical flourishes like of the bridges and tunnels. But simply having the gang spell out the points the episode's striving to make in big, impossible-to-miss letters inviting us to laugh that the gang misses them gets tired. There's too much ironic speechifying long after we've gotten the gag. Still, the resulting train wreck that is Lethal Weapon 7 has some funny moving parts. Mack and Dennis address the previous audience's confusion about the series emerges with first Dee and then Charlie's Riggs essentially doing a solo version of the Californians to explain precisely why he's late to Murtaugh's daughter's birthday party. It also continues the gang's conviction that Martin Riggs should have Gibson's Australian accent, which always makes the writer laugh. They gave that one a B-. I agree, it is the better of the two. The AV Club also has some stray observations from the pair of episodes from the first episode. Mack's questions for determining true Philly residents include, why do we hate Chris Chelios? Who's Uncle Eddie Savitz? The writer says, Google that at your peril. Now, I know the answer to the first one, but let's see. Uncle, am I going to regret this? Eddie Savitz. Oh, my. Yeah. Ugh. No, why did I do that? I can't even. Google it yourself. But now that makes that joke a lot funnier. It's horrible, but the joke is funny. I will take a break, and I'll pick up where I started last Saturday. How psychotic is Dennis? This from consequence.net. The article is called The Downward Spiral of It's Always Sunny's Dennis Reynolds. I've been doing a rewatch of the series, and my son and I talk about this a lot. When the series starts, Dennis is the most normal and together, and then as time goes on, you realize he is quite psychotic. I started to break down this article last Saturday, which is what inspired my Saturday It's Always Sunny theme that we're doing here in December. So if you want to hear about Dennis getting a little crazy part 1, go back and listen to last week's episode, and we'll start here where I left off. Season 6, Episode 3, The Gang Buys a Boat. Psychotic break, writes Consequence. The gang buys a boat, and Dennis sees it as the perfect opportunity to score chicks. Why? Because being alone in the middle of the ocean with a man she barely knows makes it hard for a woman to refuse his advances because of the implication. Victims, luckily no one. Dennis's quote, if the girl said no, then the answer is obviously no. The thing is, she's not gonna say no. She would never say no because of the implication. That is so creepy. Don't I sound like a horrible person? I'm just reading dialogue from a TV show. I don't believe these things. Diagnosis. What is this implication? According to Dennis, it's the things that might go wrong for her if she refuses to sleep with me. Now that things are going to go wrong for her, but she's thinking that they will. Maybe Dennis is getting more careful. Instead of outright overlooking the issue of consent, he's now gaslighting his consequences with vague insinuations. Dennis may not consider himself a violent person, but he sure isn't shy about using the specter of violence to his benefit. Mack says that seems really dark. Season 6, Episode 11, the gang gets stranded in the woods after the car breaks down in the woods. Dennis teaches Charlie the importance of being open to new experiences. He does this by showing how he got a hickey from, quote, an extremely young lady who was legal, totally legal, because he allowed himself to say yes to the experience. Dennis's quote, a serial killer, I like that. It's a little bit of an exaggeration, but I see your point. I take it as a compliment. Diagnosis. Dennis couching his dalliances with extremely young women in one's desire to be open to new experiences is yet another example of Dennis justifying his creepy behavior. More than that, though, this episode is notable most for the above quote. Dennis essentially is crystallizing the undercurrent of his behavior and causing us all to wonder, holy crap, is Dennis actually a serial killer? Season 7, Episode 13, The High School Reunion Part 2, The Gang's Revenge. Dennis tries to bang the wife of his old friend, but is rebuffed and humiliated in front of everybody at the high school reunion. This causes him to retreat to his car, where he tears up the lining of his trunk to reveal his tools, which consists of duct tape, zip ties, and gloves. Diagnosis. After having his college delusions ding back in Season 5, Dennis now cherishes his high school stardom that much more. After he's rejected in front of his old classmates, he screeches, I reign supreme over everyone in this school. His ego collapsing around him and madness consuming the pieces, he retrieves his tools, screaming again of savages, idiots, and now jerk-offs. He passes the tools off as fetish crap. I like to bind. I like to be bound. But we all know what this means. Dennis Reynolds is absolutely a serial killer. Season 8, Episode 5, The Gang Gets Analyzed. The gang visits Dee's therapist's office, where each member is analyzed. Dennis insists he's not a patient, however, but a colleague. Still, the therapist gets him to admit that he secretly gives Mack size pills to ensure he doesn't get fat again. Dennis doesn't see what's wrong with that. He also, for good measure, draws a sketch of him cupping the therapist's dramatically enlarged breasts. Diagnosis. It might seem that for the most part, Mack and Charlie are free from the ravages of Dennis's psychosis. Here, we learn that's not the case. In addition to Dennis literally drugging his best friend, we discover that he's been keeping psychological notes on Dee since the 2nd grade. Some of them are in crayon. Psychopaths tend to have an interest in psychology, yeah? Season 10, Episode 2. Dennis and the gang try group dating, but when things turn south, he realizes he's being rated by women on a popular website. As his star rating plummets, he becomes more and more obsessed with getting a good review, which only serves to terrify his dates that much more. The Dennis system is no longer working. Dennis no longer knows how to demonstrate value, let alone engage physically. The rating system is a tangible indicator of his own failure. Now, in a last-ditch effort to save himself from himself, he turns to the woman who's never been able to resist him, the waitress. He says to her, I've ignored your feelings for pursuits of the flesh, then offers her a promise ring, but not the promise of a relationship. He's trying to get a 5-star rating, but he finds out she doesn't use the internet. He snaps and starts screaming in the face of every woman in sight, 000. If he's a 0, he'll make sure everyone else is as well. Season 11, Episode 5, Mack and Dennis move to the suburbs. Uh-oh. And I'll tell you why I'm saying uh-oh in a second. In an effort to save money, Mack and Dennis move to the suburbs and are slowly driven crazy by the mundanity of it all. Dennis takes on the role of working stiff, and his hour-long commute in gridlock traffic sends him spiraling to heretofore unseen depths of utter rage. Now, here's the issue. If you've seen this episode, when Dennis is driving around in the suburbs and other people can't drive, he loses his mind. And you can ask my daughter, that's me every single day. My family thinks I'm insane. One of the lines Dennis says, I think I've actually said, I don't care if you're old. Seize the gap, you old fat bitch. You fat bitch. And I've done that while driving a